want to thank Johnny and Peculiar Works for bringing me here tonight, and I'm just very, very excited to chat about belief and its role in the play. It's something that I was really, really drawn to. And so we have three very, very different panelists speaking from very, very different perspectives, and just sort of want to start the conversation by asking, if you can, from your perspectives, maybe introduce where you're coming from, what you're sort of looking at it, sort of lens that you're looking at this play through, and show us, give us a glimpse on how you encountered it for the first time. What, from your perspective, what did this play raise for you? So I guess, Joseph, maybe when you first saw the script or knew that you were going to be working on this, and Sally Mill, when you saw this, from your perspective, what did it bring up?
My perspective comes from also being a performer, but in this context, working at Bellevue Hospital in the psychiatric emergency room and on a service called Mobile Crisis. So I see a lot of people in crisis that are coming in, and I help assess, and are they dangerous? Do they need to be admitted? Do they go out? So I was looking at it on a couple different levels. One of them being just the portrayal of psychiatry in general, because it's typically so stereotyped. And, it's so hard. You all did such magnificent jobs performing, because so often you see the cliche. And working in an emergency room and in current times, it's such a different thing that people are working with. They never stay long even state hospitals, which I know this was the project happened in, that people aren't there that long. So the sociology doesn't have that kind of ability to take place. But I was looking at that, oftentimes when you see schizophrenic people, especially at Bellevue, they come from a whole homeless area of destitute, and they say street skits. So they have no resources, and they're coming in and they get sent out, and it's like that revolving door. So I was sort of looking at it in that context, and just figuring out how believable you guys would be, really, quite honestly. And it was a real exercise in going in and out, and of course the doctor and the nurse, put the umbrella on the whole thing. So yes.
And Joseph?
Well, I don't know what, I did a reading of it a year ago, something like that, and read the doctor part, and then I got called in to audition for Joseph. Somewhere, I think I looked at it a little more objectively at some point, but somewhere along the line, the only lens I have right now is Joseph's lens, which has changed over the past couple months. When we started out in rehearsal, it was much different playing crazy. And at one point we did a run through, and my objective eye opened up for a minute, and I thought we were all a little too cute as these three very troubled people. And so that's when I think I tried to look at it a little more seriously. We had a lot of images and source material, and it was ugly and it was messy, and so I personally wanted to go there, but
And Bill?
I have three different perspectives. I have a PhD in theater, I have a degree in divinity, and I am a mental health counselor. I'm a therapist.
Wow.
I work as a chaplain.
Play all three, yeah.
We can just sit down.
I work as a chaplain in a nursing home on weekends, and so I'm working with people in a confined environment. And during the week, I am a therapist at Fortune Society, and I'm also clinical supervisor in a substance abuse clinic. So I'm seeing a whole bunch of stuff. And I need to begin with Sally's comment to say you guys were believable. If you want to talk belief, I'll go with that. Whenever I see a movie or something, I see an actor doing crazy. And this was just phenomenal. You guys did such a good job. I just really have to say that. in the interest of full disclosure, have to admit I saw this last week also. So this is my second time seeing it. The difference between psychosis and belief, I think, is significant. Beliefs are something we kind of look at. Psychosis is very hard to work with. I'm fortunate, I've worked with people for a period of time, and I'm thinking of someone when he was released from prison who believed that a device had been implanted in his head and his thoughts were being monitored just by that device and just by government officials. I'm very happy to say that he's doing really well now. But the idea that the psychosis is so hard to get someone to look at, you can't show insight into a psychosis. You can't objectify it. It is truth. It is the reality of world. That's like saying, I don't breathe air. Everybody here just knows that that's truth. So it was just really extraordinary to see that connection between the people who, these characters whose world was real to them, however dysfunctional and uncomfortable it was for us to witness.
Now, as a question for you, Joseph, I mean, in theater we're always playing with the idea of illusion, and did you find anything different in your preparation dealing with delusion instead of illusion?
No, just like any other character, you have to believe what you're saying, and what Joseph says is a little further out there than, say, Nora in the Doll's House, but you still have to believe it and commit to it and find an emotional truth for it.
Now, do we have any way? I'd like to see if it's possible. Yeah, you talked about the difference between psychosis and belief. Where can we draw the line? At what point does the belief become a psychosis?
My thought on mental illness, the question is not, are you mentally ill? The question is, are you so ill you cannot function? And I often will say, everybody gets a cold. Everybody gets depressed. Some people get bronchitis. They need medication. Some people get pneumonia. They have to go to a hospital. And it's a level of ability to function in the world. The individual that I had mentioned earlier is able to function in the world, and he does it primarily by acknowledging what he has and not letting it control him. It's how we function in the world, and I think psychosis is psychosis, belief is belief. The question still is just how can we deal with our everyday life?
And when it becomes dangerous.
Yes.
In context of this play, there's a really interesting psychosis that's temporary and has to do with belief and situation. It's called the Jerusalem syndrome. And people will go to Jerusalem, where it's so the ground that everything happened on, that they will have never had a mental illness before. And there are patients that will then, start to walk down the street with sheets from the hotel room and all of I mean, it was, when Y2K was going to happen, it was real, everyone was really alarmed. I read an article about it's going to really take over in Y2K. So I went out to Israel to see. I thought, I'll be a volunteer out there. Let me see what's happening. And I went to the inpatient hospital, which is nothing like here. I mean, it was probably, doors are open. And I tracked down the psychiatrist, and I said, so what's going on with the, Jerusalem syndrome? He says, they're not coming in. I don't know what happened. He had a big cigar in his mouth. I mean, my take is that they deported everyone, because I was seeing that kind of thing happen in our own hotel. Bible Bob was, shipped back to the U.S. But it's interesting that, and when they get back to the U.S., it doesn't come back. So sort of like predisposition versus like how far does it go? And, you know, like you said, when does it get to the point they can't function? When are they not eating anymore because they believe that something is in the food? And so, you know, then they become like, okay, they got to go to the hospital. So function is such an important question.
I guess on that question of functionality, there's a beautiful moment in the play where Leon's character is promising he's going to levitate the table, and we don't get to see what actually happens. The scene is cut before that, but we I encounter this moment of incredible cruelty when the doctor asks him to prove it. And there's something so fragile and beautiful about beliefs, no matter how delusional they might be, and the idea that they need to be somehow defended just makes me wonder if you guys have thoughts about about that, because that is, in terms of functionality, what would have happened for him if the doctor hadn't intervened. He might have believed that that table was levitating, and would that really have been so bad?
And when do you have to crack it? I mean, you know, so often never can you really crack it. Like somebody says, I have 500 kids. I mean, it's the most outlandish story in the world, but there's no way. I mean, it's fantastically interesting and important, and a bearing of witness when you look at someone and it unfolds, you know, everything that their life is and where they go and what it means, and it's survival. I mean, you know, there's no reason in many cases you should break down their survival, you know, and typically, I mean, it all depends on what the approach is, and in our hospital, can't really be what it's about, because it's a short-term stay and it's medication.
In terms of these guys, they have pretty good survival techniques. So they are, if something's thrown at them, they can circumvent it, and they'll find a way to rationalize what they've been told is irrational.
What I learned first working as a chaplain, but it's certainly true in this too, you can't take away something until you've let them find something to replace it with. I mean, in this play, that the doctor just was taken away, and there was no sense of trying to build something. Going back to your thing,
totally agree
that's
with that.
what you have got to do.
And how patients become, I mean, I'm not a radical thinker in all this. I love working at Bellevue Hospital. I enjoy the work. I feel there's a lot of, you know, ways of working, and, you know, in a way that's really respectful, and just going like this is a lot. But oftentimes patients become property, and somebody's success is directly relative to the doctor working with them and his or her ego. You know, you see it. And of this service, there was a patient that, such a long story, but it's, you know, I talk about it all the time. I know you're looking, know, but it's a horror story. It's I do mobile crisis, and there was I'll just give the real quick thumbnail. A 17-year-old girl living in a family, her parents were factory workers, Chinese speaking. She hadn't spoken in six years. At her therapy place, at home for 4 years, at school for 4 years, and everyone had just allowed that to happen. She would write, but she wouldn't speak. Anyway, ultimately, I got her to come to the hospital. They hospitalized her. They kept her 2 weeks, said she had borderline personality disorder, which, you know, typically means they're manipulative and don't pay any attention to them. She left, and the next week, she, on the 4th level at Bellevue, jumped down to the marble floor below. And from that moment on, she became the property of neurology, ICU, child psychiatry, you know, and everybody's news was do not, because of the high risk of it and the liability, nobody could go visit her. So she was asked every service to redevelop a foundation of trust when people were continuously taken away from her. So I'm building on that as the critical thing. the critical thing. It's like being with someone and bearing witness and being in the same room, you know, and sort of a growing concern of mine in this whole context. And we see something like the arts, like HAI Hospital Audiences brings the arts in, and it's a community right off the bat. And this theater, I mean, you know, it's, I think, why many of us were drawn to the theater. It's like we're all here together. It's an amazing thing, and that is so therapeutic. I mean, a patient is isolated and sort of contained and silenced and controlled. You know, anyway, this patient is just happening now. So I'm like, I want to talk about this patient everywhere I go.
What you say about community, I think, is really, really interesting. There's that moment early in the play where the nurse talks about them sharing the pack of gum.
Yeah.
And it just got me thinking about how hard it is to bridge different beliefs. And when you share a belief structure, how that just creates this instant sense of community that we see in political affiliation, we see in religion, we see in all sorts of identity construction. To what degree to what degree can we go beyond our little belief communities and actually have a conversation with other people who believe something completely different?
You look like you want to say something.
I mean, I feel the
wish
same
we
thing,
could-
like
wish we
it's
could
just
do
as,
more
you
than
know,
we do.
people being in the same room and building forums where that is actually just happens, you know. It's interesting to watch this play, because so often patients don't explain themselves to other patients. It's their world, you know. And so I was interested in the conversation between the three, because they don't defend themselves. It's the way it is, and, you know, so I was fascinated with how that was going to play out. But, you know, I don't really have that much more to say about the bridging of things except really creating the forums, which I think happen more and more. But, you know, as the world is getting seemingly more and more intense, like, you know, how do you do that safely?
I think that the idea that sharing the gum is the community. And it's when we work on the commonalities as opposed to the differences.
Yes, right.
Is where it's, yeah, you believe that blue is the best color and I think red is, but we both think color is great. So we can get together on that.
And Johnny was telling me that one of the first things he spoke to you about was this concept of soul competency from the Baptist tradition. I was wondering if you might have some perspectives through that lens. It could maybe talk to the audience about what that is for those who are unfamiliar.
Yeah, one of the precepts of being a Baptist, and I am bred and raised, and I love being a Baptist. American Baptist. I'm not one of those crazy people that does stuff in the South. But
Oh, come on, you're crazy. Give it
yeah,
up.
it's different crazy. Good
But
crazy.
this is what we're talking about, right?
Good crazy.
Yeah.
But the idea of soul competency, also called soul freedom, is that you are created in God's image. You are. God created you and God said this is good. You need to learn to rely on that sense of who you are and how you are a part of God's creation, how you are connected to the divine, and you need to trust that. If you read the Bible and it says you should do thus and such, but your soul is saying, no, I really shouldn't own women. No, I really should free slaves. You go with your soul. And that is the most true testimony that we can give to God being active in ourselves, in our lives. And I know there's Baptists out here, so you guys can let me know this is how you understand it too.
And then at what point, and maybe your experience as a therapist can inform this as well, is there a point in which your soul is no longer able to judge how best to connect with the divine? Is there a soul that's maybe too damaged, or is it a place too dark where it loses this perspective?
When I go into the room, I see the divine spark in everybody. And I feel that my job is to help the person see it. And I feel that if the person can really connect to that, thinking about what you said about being the property, one of the things that I do constantly in treatment is to say, you're doing the work, you get the credit. You're the one out there, you're the one challenging yourself. I'm just here pushing you. I'm just giving suggestions, but you're the one doing the work. That the more that people can do that, the more people can connect to, and I know I've worked with some atheist types and we have different language, but this sense of self, this sense of truth, this sense of inner being, the less likely a person is to act in such a way to cause harm to himself or to others.
And that's always considered a protective factor, like when somebody comes in to the emergency room, the assessment is, how at risk are they? And if they have a connection to religion, typically they won't kill themselves, or they won't kill someone else. If that's somewhere embedded in them, that's a protective factor, and, it's when somebody has nothing. But on the other side of that, in terms of, when does somebody not? I think that's a question none of us have the capacity to determine, when somebody believes something, that's their belief. And in terms of that, I do feel like that's their, deep right. When doctors and anybody comes in and says, no, you don't have that. You don't. I only saw one guy who came in and was like totally the Jesus thing. It's gone much more to politics, and I'm here to see Beyonce, and I'm married to her, and that's more what I see. But the Jesus man, was coming in like gangbusters, and he was like aggressive, and they had to tie him up, and he's like tied up because that's when somebody's dangerous and hitting and whatever. And he's like, I am Jesus, I am Jesus, I am Jesus, I'm Jesus. And at one point he just shouted out, everybody's going down. It was such a beautiful comment. He's tied up. He's locked up. And that's his comment. Everybody's going down.
I think that sort of touches on the fact that I don't know about everybody else and experience, but I think my experience watching the play is I want one of them to actually be Jesus.
Yeah.
I want to see that
right,
happen. And,
right.
and I'm as struck by the doctor's faith in his own belief structure and the delusions inherent in that as I am by the delusions. Not to say that medical professionals and scientists in general are chasing delusions, but I think the idea, I think it's much safer ground to follow what you guys were saying and saying if somebody is physically hurting themselves or others or cannot function in life, then we can support them in different ways. But if we're looking at this question of what is crazy versus what is belief, then that's just about norms and
Yes,
who's aligning with what norms.
it's a total arrogance to do that, yeah.
Well, and they change over time too. Barry or Ralph can speak better to this, but the doctor did in a later publication of the book add kind of an apology for what he did. He came to realize over the years that maybe he hadn't been as ethical as he thought he was.
Yes. Can you peel back the curtain a little bit? And you have that really beautiful moving moment at the end of the play. In other words, I have to do that. And then you kick down the books. What's going on for you in that moment and how it connects to your belief structures being tampered with?
Well, Joseph wants to save people, and throughout the play, he believes that potent valumycin helps him do that. And when he can't take the potent valumycin anymore, I think for me, I decided that when I asked the doctor for that last pill before he says it's been discontinued, that I have given over, I've let go of the fact that this is a stronghold. Now what I need is this pill to save lives. So when that's taken away, then there has to be a rebuilding of my belief in terms of how am I going to save lives. So I get rid of that. And I needed something to get me to the book burning later in the play, so that became that moment, is getting rid of the books.
I think it's just, so telling about this, the fact that when our beliefs are challenged to this point, that we are psychotic too. All we can do is break things because we're past the point of speech, we're past the point of any reasonable logical statement. So yeah, I thought it just functioned really interesting, successful symbol.
John,
Yeah.
we don't want to keep people here too very long,
Yeah.
just sort of a warning if people want to talk or ask questions or make
Yeah, I was going to
comments.
turn over to questions right
You
now.
guys
Yeah.
can think about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was actually going to turn over to questions right now. Yeah.
How is the book regarded in professional circles? Is it esteemed, or how is it?
The study
yeah,
of.
do you know about the study? I imagine like most of these sort of mid-century studies, they're
I'd say
widely
dated.
discredited. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, well, in those days.
And
you
there's
read it.
really a superior ethic now.
Right.
You know, a
And
lot
that's
of
what's so
pride in
troubling.
that. That's troubling when you
Yeah.
really put it in the context now.
But is
of-
there any value to be gained in reading it?
I think there's a lot of value to be gained in seeing the play.
Yeah.
You know how.
Only from a historic point of view. I think the whole understanding of the brain is so different now than it was then. That idea of
Yeah.
neuroplasticity and that the brain adapts. At that time, you had your brain when you were like 6, and that was it. It was never going to change. Whatever, if you got injured, it was going to stay injured. If something got damaged, it was going to stay damaged. There's just a whole different look at the whole biology of mental illness than then. We now understand that there are neurochemicals that are malfunctioning or inappropriate, and that's medication is to address that. It's whatever this was, it was not that.
Other questions? Yeah.
Being Jesus was different for each of these three men. What was it that was, I mean, I'm an atheist, so it's a very different point of view. So being Jesus gave them something, they got something from it. But each of you saw it differently. How do you see, and how would you express the different benefits that each of them got from being Jesus, or what Jesus was different to each of them? Is there a way that you can describe it?
I can only speak for myself. I don't, because those other two guys aren't Jesus. I'm actually, just for the record, I am born on December 25th. The benefit for Joseph was that I can save lives as the Almighty, and taking care of this stronghold for England, and a really easy, and it probably is not this easy a connection, is the fact that he hurt a lot of people before he got really sick, and so he needs to do the opposite. He needs to help people, and that being God and being in charge of the English stronghold are his ways of doing that.
So the question of how, I'm sorry to interrupt, I
No,
thought
I'm
you were,
done.
you were, you were
I am
done,
done.
of how people end up on particular delusions is fascinating and is different in different countries. When is it the CIA? When is it religion? You know, how people end up. I don't think that there is, you know, research that answers that. But anyway, when they gave those little snippets at the beginning, I think that was to help us understand how these three ended up there.
Right. It's and this does come out here, it's a way of defending myself from the reality that attacks me. And here we have someone who now saves people because the reality of his past was too difficult for him to handle. I'm guessing the penniless millionaire was because he lost all of his land, he drank it all up. And then I'm really not sure what Leon was getting out of the Jesus thing. And
He was the son that his mother always wanted him to be. If he was Christ, he was the son that his mother wanted him to be.
though she wasn't good enough to be his mother.
Because he was Christ.
An interesting fact just from the book is, this was a line in the play at one point, is that Joseph didn't start claiming he was Christ until long after he'd been hospitalized.
That is interesting.
I don't know what that means, but interesting fact.
Another step in your survival.
Is
I
that?
think it was another step in your survival.
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of problems in the hospital.
I just want to say that you were already incredibly impressive in your ability to maintain a consistency of your affliction all the way through your play. That's so amazing.
Thank you.
We actually promote the couple that maybe all of you have some experience with just working with mentally ill people. Do you find playing the character or working with people who are sick in that way that you become more not only forgiving of those delusions, but maybe like forgiving in the sense that you can sort of accept them, get too into that character, or have to kind of accept people's their systems of survival in order to be around them?
I've certainly become more aware of it walking down the street. I mean, obviously we see it in New York a lot, but I'm starting to see it in people who maybe aren't.
But isn't that the idea, though, right? Because we're all a little bit in some way, and it's
It's a
about what that
spectrum.
right.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I got one question for you, just because the coincidence is too exciting to pass up. What do you think draws people who have this passionate interest in theater to exploration of mental illness and psychology and psychiatry?
I mean, people are really playing these parts, and it's so real, and you can't, I mean, you guys were amazing in the portrayal. It's so hard to do, and I'm so critical of how it's typically portrayed, and not only that, but controlled in the media, which is another whole story. But you know, performers love to go into these other worlds and, you know, be a part of them. And, you know, mental illness is, you know, it's a survival technique for them. Their world is, you know, so acutely important in what they have and what they won't give up and where they have to go. And if they need to go here, then there, and, you know, do this geographic thing all over the world. I mean, it's remarkable what they're motivated to do. And, you know, it's hard not to see them as a portal, which is totally cliche, but it's such a live experience being with them and figuring out how you can, you know, if you're working with them in the mental health capacity, how you can, you know, both kind of contain them and set them free, you know what that line is.
I think for me, it was always looking for the truth in the character, and this is looking for the truth in the person.
Mm-hmm.
That just kind of is how I
That's great.
approach it and feel about it. I would just say one thing to Johnny's question. Working with someone, you can't really get on their side or you can't help them.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be very careful not to judge them, not to belittle them. You need to accept them where they are, but you can never lose sight of where you would like them to get. Because if you don't have that, they're never going to get there.
It's a good answer, yeah.
We'll end on that. Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Please share the news on Christs Talkback.
Such a good experience.
Visualization was
So glad this thing